Welcome to STRATEGIKON.
Hello world, I'm John Broody and you're listening to STRATEGIKON, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. Unfortunately, co-host David Olney can't be with us owing to his work and study commitments, but welcome to producer Michael McGalley. G'day, Michael.
G'day, how are you guys today?
Good. Today's topic will be on a rapidly changing political space in Britain, and for this we'll be joined again by our regular commentator on the UK, Commodore Patrick J. Tyrrell OBE RN retired. Pat is the chair of the SAGE International Advisory Board and SAGE's non-resident fellow Global and Maritime Security. Pat, welcome back to The Focus.
Hey, good day to you both.
So, Pat, with a recent funeral service for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the UK's longest-serving monarch, how long do you think it will take for the country to settle into the reign of King Charles III?
Well, in many ways, it has already begun to settle. You will have seen the pictures and the videos of the week of general mourning and then the funeral. And I think this has given the British people a unique opportunity to recognize everything that Her Majesty, late Majesty did, and also show King Charles as the new monarch, and to show that, there were lots of people who were saying that the monarchy should skip a generation. And that, of course, this is because of social media. William, now the Prince of Wales, is a very media savvy person. He's grown up with it. He's highly personable. He's got a charming wife who never seems to put a foot wrong, and he's got a lovely family. Whereas Charles, of course, who is a media person, he's a bit like me, really. He is still a bit stiff and unbending in public, but he gave some really good speeches and an address to the Houses of Parliament and to other groupings that showed that this is a man who has indeed spent his 70 years of apprenticeship building upon his ideas and working out what he wanted to do when he was king. Of course, there are some things that bring you up short when someone gets up at a dinner and says, "God save the king." You can feel them having to mentally concentrate so they don't get it wrong. Queen's Council, QCs, are now known as King's Council, KCs. So there are bits and pieces. There have been a number of email scams trying to tell you that your money with the Queen's head on is no longer valid, and therefore please send your money to this address and we will reissue money with the King's head on it. So obviously there are some hiccups on the way. Of course, as far as money goes, when I was young, before decimalisation in this country, we had Queen Victoria pennies circulating, or King Edward VII coin circulating. So, there's been no change with the money. So I think actually it has been pretty smooth. Now, the question is going to be, what happens when we all come back down to earth and start looking at what is going on in our name, and that might easily bring us back to Mary Elizabeth Truss and as the new Prime Minister.
Well, yeah, you know, it's really interesting in terms of this is, I think, the first time in a long time that Britain had such a change in terms of both the Prime Minister as well as the monarch.
Well,
so it's all sort of come
together. And two monarchs in a week.
Yes.
I mean,
yes. It's
very often.
No, it doesn't. And the interesting thing is that, of course, as you were indicating, you know, Liz Truss comes into the Prime Minister's office with a bunch of problems dangling from her neck. You know, you've got the skyrocketing inflation issue. You've got, of course, the energy and food crisis due to the Russia-Ukraine war. You've got the support of Ukraine, the military support of Ukraine, which, of course, was done in great Churchillian swagger by former Prime Minister Johnson, and hopefully will probably continue under Truss. But really, these are very big strategic problems to come into office, you know, with these issues on your back, basically. How do you think Truss is going to deal with all of these things?
Well, I suspect she's relying on the honeymoon effect. She has got a highly ambitious program, and it's one that's based on economic theory that is unorthodox. Now, she's going to go in, she's proposing to cut taxes, raise government spending, all in the hope that this will generate growth. It may happen. I mean, you know, her economic theory is backed by one or two economists, not by the majority. But to some extent, you know, she's got nothing really to lose and everything to gain from this. If she'd carried on with the orthodox economic theories, we would have continued in the UK to suffer from low economic growth, high inflation, you know, the issue of social welfare, being able to support people who need supporting. And she has got 2 years before there has to be a general election. Now, funnily enough, even Boris Johnson at the end of his term was not far behind the Labour Party, the major opposition, which implied that the British public actually didn't think much to either the Conservatives or the Labour Party. And as we know, in a democratic situation, you need to always have a party that looks as though it can assume government.
Yes.
Because otherwise the whole thing breaks down.
Yes.
You know, now you might have proportional representation, and you might have to have that negotiations between different parties, because you have so many parties represented in a parliament. But even so, that tends to mean that there's a coalesce around the centre path. It might be centre left or centre right, but you know, that's been traditionally the way it's been. Liz Truss has to show that the Conservative Party, which has, okay, it's done one or two things right, but it's not been covered in glory in many of its other activities. You know, it became the party associated with sleaze, you know, with the parties at number 10, with a seeming disregard for what were the rules and norms. There have been a number of Conservative MPs who have been caught, I won't say with their pants down, but you know, in a way that is considered by the British people as unprofessional. So if she did exactly the same as what her predecessor had done in terms of policies, the chances of it working are very limited, very slim. And therefore, the Conservative Party would be voted out of office in 2 years' time. So
Pat, it sounds very much like the UK is in some major crisis because, again, if you look at the Labour Party and Keir Starmer, and you look at Labour policy, it's not really the kind of policy that you'd want to try to address some of these deeper issues of inflation and, you know, food prices and energy prices. I mean, you know, and if you only have one or two economists who are backing Liz Truss, there's not going to be an answer from the Conservative side of politics that's going to satisfy the British people. There will not be an alternative from the Labour Party that's going to satisfy the British people. The Liberal Democrats are, well, lost in the wilderness, shall we say. What is there for the British public to hold on to in these times of crisis?
Well, I think let's take a step back. The problems you have described are problems that relate to, let's say, Sweden, to the United States, to, in fact, all liberal democracies at the moment. And, you know, liberal democracies are great because, you know, when it's in a stable world, because they can make plans that will take years to develop. And there's general consensus amongst the principal ruling parties that they can develop those policies over 10, 20 years. Liberal democracies are now facing this economic threat, this security threat, and are having to work out how to do it in a way that damages their populations to the least extent. And of course, the populations have, over the last 25 years, grown used to enjoying the fruits of a liberal democracy. Now, you know, if you look back, how many people talk about high inflation? When I first bought a house, I mean, inflation was, you know, interest rates were 15, 16%. You know, we've had 10 years of having rock bottom levels of interest rate, which has been marvelous if you want to buy a house. It's not been so good if you've been a pensioner living off your principal, you know, whereas in the past you could live off the income and now there's no income. So it's swings and roundabouts. Do I think we're in an existential crisis? No, I don't. We've just got lots of crises piled one on top of the other. And, you know, this is, in scientific, in engineering terms, this is the difference between complicated and complex. Because if you want to build, I don't know, 747, for example, you could ring up Boeing and ask them to deliver all the parts, let's say 2 million parts, lay them out on your lawn at home, take an instruction booklet and fit piece A to piece B, and then add C, and so on and so forth, a bit like building an IKEA bookshelf. it's complicated, because you've got to be, very consistent, very systematic at doing it. But we're in a complex situation, which is when you change something, something else also changes. So in a Boeing, when you're putting it together, part 55 remains static. It's a lump of metal, let's say. It does a specific job. If you're in a complex organization, like a living organization, if you change part 55, part 1233 also changes because there's a dynamism about it. So, of course, when we change the economic organism, other bits change. So Liz Truss is intending to lower stamp duty, lower corporation tax, possibly lower income tax, raise state benefits. Now, all of these act in a sort of symbiotic manner. And indeed, that's what Liz Truss is hoping. She's hoping that by changing the taxes, people are going to say, I've got more money. I'm going to go out and I'm going to set up my business. I am going to, make widgets and sell them to the world.
Pat, can I just say, if that's true, then I would put forward a case that Liz Truss is doing what a conservative leader would normally do under these sort of circumstances. But as you pointed out earlier, a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is a sort of multiple layers of crisis. Can going back to basics and going back to traditional policy settings help address some of the things that we are currently seeing at the moment? Because I'm not sure whether or not that would be the case. I mean, you're very correct in saying that it's not Britain alone that's suffering the slings and arrows of fate with regard to energy, food, and so on and so forth. Other countries are as well. And you and I have both privately chatted about the lack of policy coherence in the West and the inability of political leaders to come forward with ideas necessary to prevent, if not overcome, crises that were at that time that we were talking about were just, on the verge of breaking out rather than being, because right now we're stuck in the middle of things. So your confidence that Truss has got the measure of the situation?
I'm not sure she has the true measure of the situation. And in a paradoxical fashion, that's probably a good thing. Because I think if she knew what the true problems were, to which there are no standard answers, that's why we go back to a degree of orthodoxy, if you like, in terms of the Conservative Party. How can I be a better Conservative Party member?
Yeah. Because
that's a, if you like, is felt to be a given. That's what we did 40 years ago, and that worked. That's what we did in the 1970s. That's what we did in the early 2000s, and it worked. Whether it will work now remains to be seen. And I think if, facing the issues that we're facing, let's add climate change on top of that. After all, the UK has had its driest summer in 50 years. And, there are problems and issues that are coming with that. I mean, other countries have had much worse. Look at Pakistan at the moment, look at the wildfires in California, look at the drought in California. So I think if Liz Truss knew the whole picture, she would not be able to do anything. There would be a paralysis at the top of government.
There have been a lot of people on the BBC, as well as the local ABC here, talking about republicanism, and that now that Queen Elizabeth has been put to rest, you know, any residual loyalties that Commonwealth countries had toward the British monarchy died with Her Majesty the Queen and will not automatically transfer across to King Charles III. Do you think this is just media speculation and hyperbole? Because I think that there was a recent poll that was done here in Australia that suggests that, you know what, we're not rushing into republicanism here.
Well, I think that if we face facts, you can say that having, you know, a billionaire family having the perpetual rights to be the head of state of a country sounds like a very odd thing to do. But then I look in this country, you know, President Jeremy Corbyn would fill me with absolute horror, you know, because they're politicians. I mean, there are a whole load of politicians you could think of as, you know, when they're no longer prime minister or a secretary of state, you know, they decide they're going to stand as president of the country. And, you know, who are they? You know, what is it that they bring? They don't bring very much. Whereas the head of state is a person who can hold the nation together. Now, that must be someone who has a historical background is the wrong term, but comes from deep down within the nation's psyche. And it happens that having a monarch comes from deep down. They don't represent Charles Windsor or Elizabeth Windsor. They represent the feelings of, you know, millions of people in that particular country. And I think we saw it in the remarkable response to the death of Her late Majesty. And I think that, you know, as long as the head of state doesn't get involved in setting policy, which is clearly a political thing to do, and acts as a figurehead, it's not a job I'd like, I have to say, but, you know, acts as a figurehead, then that is something around which a nation can coalesce. Now, if Charles starts writing his spidery notes, saying you must do this and you must do that, he said he won't, so, you know, and I believe him, then you would have your head of state moving into the political camp, in which case you might just as well say, well, let's put an ex-politician in that role. Yeah.
Is there a danger that King Charles may go down that direction? Because you mentioned earlier, you know, climate change, and he's very much the champion of things green. So do you think that, you know, his passion for renewable energy and various other bits and pieces would stray into the political aspect of policy making?
Absolutely. I mean, I think King Charles has been consistent since he was in his early 20s. I mean, he was deeply unpopular. You know, people said, oh, he talks to plants and, you know, he's doing this and that. And actually, you know, he was trying to warn that we were using the Earth's resources to our complete detriment. And people ignored him. And I think that, you know, he's a bit like a state version of David Attenborough. you know, producing these great natural history programs. And I think another thing I want to bring up is whether or not there are international diplomatic benefits to having a monarch who is seen as being truly independent. I think that if you look back at the work the Queen did, she was very influential in a apolitical manner. She would bring people together. She had that ability when meeting people to make the people she met feel that they were important, and as on an equal par with Her Majesty the Queen. She would put you at ease. She would defuse, if you like, international tensions. And I think from that point of view, whereas in international politics, when one president meets another president, they know they are political beasts. When Her Majesty the Queen or His Majesty the King meet presidents, they know that the king or queen is independent and therefore will tend to be more prepared to discuss the real issues rather than showcasing, their particular political point.
Pat, a number of other issues flow from what we've recently witnessed in the UK, which is actually quite historic. And that is, the situation with regard to Scotland. I mean, I hear that Nicola Sturgeon is stirring the pot yet again with regard to Scottish independence. Maybe she thinks that merry old England is fatally wounded by the loss of the Queen and with Liz Truss in number 10. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that with all due respect to Nicola Sturgeon, she's got this idée fixe on independent Scotland and believes that independence will solve all of Scotland's problems. Now, at the moment, the Scottish government controls quite a few of the levers of power. It receives a large amount of money through a very complicated thing called the Barnett formula, which adjusts for money received so that the wealthier southeast around London contributes towards Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. And yet, she can't manage her social expenditure in a way that gives tangible results. So, waiting lists are longer in Scotland. Drug deaths are higher in Scotland. Education is poorer and has been dropping in Scotland. Now, if she wants to have independence, and if the people of Scotland want to have independence, then she needs to fix her own house before moving out, because otherwise they will not be able to deliver the right sort of level to the Scottish people. Problem is that she turns it into this emotional type of thing, saying it's going to be much better when we're out of Scotland.
So finally, Pat, what's your view on the situation with regard to Northern Ireland? Do you think that there is some form of, policy setting that can be put forward that'll make everything easy between the EU and Ireland proper?
Well, this is where I feel that Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, having agreed a protocol for leaving the EU, then finds it doesn't work and tries to change it. Of course, we need to bear in mind what Winston Churchill said, which is jaw is better than war. So we need to be talking to the EU about the practical problems. And there are some real practical problems, because this protocol set up the customs border in the Irish Sea. So anything going to Northern Ireland, which is a province of the United Kingdom, is subject to the same rules as the EU. That means we can't supply normal pharmacy things to the Northern Ireland people unless they've been approved of by the EU, even though those pharmacy products are not going to go into the Republic of Ireland. So there needs to be a debate. And I know Liz Truss, she is aggressive, she is abrasive, she will attack rather than debate to start with. And therefore she is saying we're going to have this ability to disregard the protocol to be able to do what we want to do. But at some stage, you're going to have to negotiate with the EU.
Yeah.
So why don't we do it first?
Yeah. Well, anyway, Pat, that's all the time that we have today. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for sharing your insights on Strategikon.
Well, that's a pleasure, John. And thanks very much, Mike, for making it all happen. Bye-bye.
Bye. My thanks to our guest, Pat Tyrrell, and to producer Michael McGarley, and to the Ozcast Network. To our audience, thanks for listening. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you can subscribe to the audio version of Strategikon through the Ozcast Network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. And please like us on the Sage International Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate your support. You can also watch our podcasts on video through the Strategikon Raw YouTube channel when they're available, easily accessed by clicking on the link provided on our website. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, John Bruni. You've been listening to Strategikon, a Sage International podcast.